Carl Jung once said that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But hidden in that idea is something more radical. When you discover the depths of your own being, nobody and nothing outside of you can ever disturb your center again. The storms of life may shake the surface, but at the core you remain untouched. This is not an easy state to reach. It demands the kind of transformation that feels like being broken apart before being made whole. Yet it is the path Jung devoted his life to exploring. To understand what Jung meant, we must step into the terrain of what he called individuation. At its heart, individuation is the process of unifying the fragmented pieces of the psyche into a living whole. Most people live as masks. They carry the weight of expectations, chase approval, and fear rejection. They walk through the world like fragile glass, vulnerable to every opinion, every slight, every criticism. A harsh word, a betrayal, or even the silent indifference of others can shatter their sense of worth. But Jung's philosophy whispers a deeper truth. This fragility comes from living too close to the surface. When you sink into the depths of who you really are, the voices of the crowd lose their power. They cannot touch what lies beneath. In Jung's view, the psyche is not a simple thing. It is vast, layered, and alive with forces we barely understand. There is the persona, which is the mask we wear in society, polished and adapted to fit the roles we must play. There is the shadow, which is the hidden self, carrying the instincts, impulses, and truths we deny. And beyond these there is the self. Not the ego, but something infinitely larger. The unifying center that holds the totality of who we are. Individuation is the slow and often painful journey of reconciling these forces. It is the step beyond the mask. It is the courage of facing the shadow until the self can emerge as a guiding light. And when that light appears, something extraordinary happens. You realize that nothing external has the authority to define you anymore. Jung saw that modern man was trapped in a peculiar kind of slavery. Outwardly free, inwardly bound, people tied themselves to the opinions of others, to cultural scripts, to shallow identities. They spent their lives defending an image rather than touching the depths of their being. And this, Jung believed, was why so many were crushed by the smallest disappointments or paralyzed by criticism. They were not standing on the ground of their true self, but balancing on the fragile scaffolding of the persona. A single gust of wind and it all collapsed. But there is a point in life where this collapse is not a tragedy but a liberation. Jung knew that crises, breakdowns, and moments of despair could serve as the cracks through which the deeper self emerges. When the persona fails, when the mask breaks, when the old ways of being no longer hold, then the journey into the depths begins. And it is through that journey that one finds a place of strength that cannot be shaken by the world. Jung often said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That choice is the essence of individuation. It is the decision to no longer be defined by events or wounds or others, but to step into the wholeness of one's own being. This wholeness does not mean perfection. It does not mean indifference. It means integration. It means facing the shadow and reclaiming the parts of yourself you once feared or rejected. It means accepting the contradictions, the light and the dark, the vulnerability and the strength, the fear and the courage, as all belonging to the same self. Only then does life stop being a constant battle with external forces. The world may still test you, but its power to unmake you disappears. You carry within you a ground of being that no insult, no rejection, no chaos can uproot. You become like a tree whose roots are buried deep in the earth. Storms may bend the branches, but the trunk remains unmoved. Jung often spoke of how much of human suffering comes from identifying too closely with the ego. The ego is fragile because it is partial. It is only a fragment of the psyche pretending to be the whole. It lives in constant fear of humiliation, defeat, and death because it knows it cannot withstand them. But when you begin to identify with the larger self, when you recognize that you are more than the ego's narrow boundaries, something changes. Life's blows no longer feel like annihilation. They become experiences woven into a larger pattern. Pain is still pain, but it is not destruction. Loss is still loss, but it does not erase you. This shift is what Jung meant by freedom from external influence. It is not the absence of suffering, but the discovery of a center that suffering cannot penetrate. The world tells us we must harden ourselves to survive. It urges us to become untouchable by building walls, suppressing feelings, or chasing power. But Jung's path is very different. It is not about becoming numb but about becoming whole. When you integrate your shadow, when you accept your contradictions, when you anchor yourself in the self, you are no longer at war with the world. You are no longer running from yourself. And in that state, nobody's judgment, nobody's anger, nobody's indifference can truly shake you because you no longer depend on them to confirm your worth. This is why Jung's vision is not only psychological but spiritual. He saw individuation as a sacred process. It is the unfolding of the self like a mandala, a symbol of harmony and totality. To live from the self is to live from the center of this mandala where the opposites are reconciled and life flows with a sense of meaning that cannot be destroyed by external events. And once you touch this center, you understand the truth of Jung's insight. Nobody and nothing can affect you again. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. To live from the self is to step into a state where the movements of the world no longer determine your inner rhythm. Jung often described this transformation as a return to the center. At the surface, we are tossed around by every wave. But in the depths, there is stillness. The stillness is not empty. It is alive with meaning. It is the ground from which true strength arises. And once you discover it, you can never again be entirely swept away by the opinions or the chaos of others. Jung believed that the modern person suffers from what he called spiritual starvation. Surrounded by machines and noise and endless distractions, the inner life becomes neglected. The more one turns outward, the more vulnerable one becomes to the shifting winds of society. What others say, what others think, what others demand begins to govern the soul. But the one who returns inward, who begins the path of individuation, becomes free. They are no longer starving for external approval because they have tasted the nourishment of the self. The inner world becomes real and strong. The outer world loses its ability to command absolute obedience. This change is not sudden. It unfolds slowly like a seed breaking through the soil. Jung often compared the self to an image that appears in dreams or symbols. The mandala was one of these symbols. A circle containing balance and harmony. When the mandala appeared, Jung knew the psyche was guiding the person toward integration. It was not the ego's creation. It rose from the depths as if the soul itself was revealing its hidden design. And when a person learned to live from that design, they no longer needed to be defended against every wound or insult. They no longer felt broken by rejection. They stood inside a pattern larger than any single moment of pain. To reach this point, one must confront the shadow. Jung warned that nobody can become whole by clinging only to the light. The parts we deny, the anger, the fear, the envy, the wounded impulses, do not disappear. They remain in the dark corners of the psyche waiting to emerge. When we pretend they are not there, they control us from below. We become reactive to others because they stir up what we refuse to see in ourselves. But when we face the shadow with honesty and courage, it begins to lose its power. The person who has embraced their own darkness cannot be manipulated by the darkness of others. Criticism no longer cuts as deeply because the hidden wound has already been acknowledged. Shame no longer enslaves because the truth has already been faced. This is why Jung's path is both painful and liberating. To face the shadow feels like death to the ego. It resists with all its strength. But when you allow the shadow to speak, when you bring it into consciousness, it transforms. It does not disappear, but it becomes part of the wholeness. What once was feared becomes integrated. And in that moment, the world loses one of its sharpest weapons against you. Nobody can use your own denied truths to hurt you anymore because you have already embraced them yourself. Jung also spoke of what he called the anima and the animus. These were the inner figures of the feminine within the man and the masculine within the woman. They too must be faced and integrated. If ignored, they rule from the unconscious, leading to projections and painful entanglements with others. How often do people fall in love not with who someone truly is, but with the projection of their inner figure? They give away their power because they cannot see that what fascinates them is a part of their own psyche calling for recognition. By integrating the anima or animus, a person withdraws these projections. Relationships become freer. Love becomes clearer. And most importantly, the individual no longer depends on another person to complete them. They are whole within themselves. This wholeness makes them unshakable. The loss of love still hurts, but it does not destroy. The rejection of others still wounds, but it does not strip away identity. Because identity no longer hangs on someone else's presence. At the deepest level, Jung believed that the self is not only psychological but also a bridge to the eternal. He saw that within the human psyche lies an archetype of totality, a living pattern that reflects something greater than the individual. In dreams and myths and art across cultures, the same symbols appear. Circles, crosses, mandalas, sacred trees. They point to an underlying order that transcends the ego. To connect with this order is to realize that you are part of something vast. And once that realization dawns, the grip of daily struggles begins to weaken. The world may bring loss or failure, but beneath it all there is a sense of belonging to an eternal pattern. That is why Jung saw individuation as not only healing but holy. It was the way the finite self meets the infinite. When a person reaches even a glimpse of this understanding, the petty conflicts of life lose much of their power. An insult no longer defines you. A betrayal no longer crushes your identity. A failure no longer convinces you that you are nothing. These events still hurt, but they do not reach the center. They are surface ripples on a vast ocean. The self remains deep and calm beneath them all. This is the freedom Jung pointed to. The freedom where nobody and nothing can truly affect you again. To live with the self as your center is to experience a different relationship with time. The ego is always impatient. It fears that life is slipping away. It clings to successes as proof of worth and dreads failures as evidence of ruin. But the self is timeless. It carries the sense that every moment belongs to a larger unfolding. When you live from this place, you no longer feel enslaved by the rush of events. You see patterns instead of random accidents. You feel meaning instead of emptiness. And when life brings difficulty, you sense that it too belongs to the greater story of becoming. Jung observed that suffering often forces people toward this deeper truth. Many only begin the path of individuation when life refuses to go according to plan. When careers collapse, when relationships break, when health falters, the ego feels defeated. But these very defeats are what drive the soul inward. They strip away illusions and reveal the fragile nature of the persona. Jung did not see this as punishment but as initiation. Pain opens the door to the deeper self. And once that door is crossed, the hold of external forces begins to fade. One of Jung's most striking insights was that the psyche seeks wholeness on its own. Just as the body knows how to heal a wound, the psyche knows how to restore balance. Dreams, fantasies, and even symptoms often carry this purpose. They guide us toward what has been forgotten or denied. The problem is that the ego resists. It does not want to face the truth of weakness or fear. It wants to remain in control. But the psyche pushes back. Nightmares rise to force attention. Anxiety swells to expose hidden conflict. Depression presses down to turn the gaze inward. These experiences feel like enemies, yet Jung saw them as messengers. They carried the voice of the self demanding to be heard. And when we finally listen, we discover that what seemed to attack us was guiding us toward wholeness. This is why nobody and nothing can hold power over the individuated soul. For the one who has faced their shadow, even suffering becomes part of meaning. The loss of status no longer erases identity. The criticism of others no longer dictates self-worth. The chaos of the world no longer steals peace. Because each experience is recognized as part of the psyche's dialogue with itself. Even pain becomes a path of growth. It does not destroy the center. It strengthens it. Jung's patients often came to him broken by the judgments of society. Many felt trapped by the need to conform. They lived lives of quiet despair, fearing to step beyond the expectations of family or culture. Jung did not urge rebellion for its own sake. He urged authenticity. He wanted each person to listen to the voice of their own depths rather than the commands of the outer world. This was not selfishness. It was alignment. A person who is true to their self becomes more human, not less. They are less likely to harm others because they no longer project their shadow outward. They are less likely to hate because they have faced the roots of hate within. They are less likely to collapse because their strength no longer depends on fragile masks. This state of inner independence also transforms the way we love. Ordinary love often carries chains of dependence. We cling to another to complete us. We fear their departure because it feels like death. But when you are whole within yourself, love is no longer a desperate grasp. It becomes a gift. You share not to fill emptiness but to overflow from fullness. Rejection still hurts, but it does not erase the self. Loss still wounds, but it does not strip life of meaning. This is why Jung insisted that individuation is the foundation for true relationship. Only the one who is whole can love without chains. Only the one who is whole can give without fear. And this wholeness cannot be taken away by anyone. At times Jung spoke of this process as becoming like a vessel strong enough to hold opposites. Joy and sorrow. Strength and weakness. Hope and despair. Instead of being torn apart by contradictions, you carry them together. Life no longer feels like an endless battle between extremes. It becomes a dialogue. The psyche expands to hold it all. And in that expansion you become unshakable. The insults of others no longer cut to the bone because you already hold both pride and humility within. The chaos of the world no longer feels overwhelming because you already carry order and disorder inside your own being. You are no longer split. You are whole. This does not mean invulnerability in the cold sense. It is not about becoming stone. It is about becoming alive in a way that nothing external can reduce. Your tears are still real. Your laughter is still full. But underneath both is a stillness that cannot be touched. This is the gift of individuation. It is the quiet strength of knowing that no event, no person, no force can strip you of yourself. As Jung looked deeper into the psyche, he began to see that individuation was never only about personal healing. It was also about reconnecting the human being to something larger than themselves. Beneath the personal unconscious with its memories and forgotten experiences, he found what he called the collective unconscious. This was the shared layer of the psyche that carried the ancient patterns of humanity. It was here that myths and symbols lived. It was here that the archetypes waited. And to encounter them was to recognize that your individual story was part of something timeless. The collective unconscious is filled with images that appear across cultures. The wise old man, the great mother, the hero, the trickster, the mandala. These figures arise in dreams and stories not because we invent them but because they live deep within us. To encounter them is to realize that your life is not just a random sequence of accidents. It participates in the same patterns that guided human beings for thousands of years. And when you see this, your struggles begin to feel different. They are no longer meaningless blows of fate. They are steps in a journey that has been walked by countless souls before you. This recognition gives strength. It brings a sense of dignity to suffering. It makes you understand that even your pain belongs to the great story of the self unfolding. This is why nobody and nothing can ever truly define you once you have touched these depths. The world may call you a failure, but in the archetype of the hero, failure is part of the path. The world may call you weak, but in the archetype of the wounded healer, weakness is what gives birth to compassion. The world may reject you, but in the archetype of the seeker, rejection is the moment that turns the journey inward. Every insult, every loss, every betrayal becomes woven into a pattern far greater than what the surface can see. And when you know this, you cannot be destroyed by the judgments of others. Jung himself endured isolation and misunderstanding. His break with Freud left him shaken and alone. For years he entered into what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. He allowed himself to descend into visions and images that at times felt overwhelming. Out of this descent came his most profound insights. He discovered that the psyche was not chaos but cosmos. He discovered that the unconscious was not an enemy but a guide. And he emerged stronger because he had faced what most people fear to face. He had entered the depths and returned. This is why his words carry weight. They are not theories born of speculation. They are truths forged in the fire of lived experience. When Jung spoke of wholeness, he did not mean comfort. He meant the courage to endure the tension of opposites until something new could emerge. He knew that the modern mind longed for certainty, but life offered paradox. Light and darkness. Order and chaos. Joy and despair. The individuated person does not run from this tension. They hold it until the self brings forth a deeper resolution. And because of this, they become immovable. The opinions of others no longer shake them because they are anchored in a truth that is larger than opinion. The rise and fall of fortune no longer dominates them because they live from a ground that is deeper than success or failure. This is why Jung often compared individuation to a religious experience. Not because it belonged to any single faith, but because it touched the same depths that religion has always sought to reach. The self is the symbol of God within the psyche. It is the inner image of the eternal. To encounter it is to discover a source of meaning that no external loss can erase. In that encounter you begin to understand why nothing outside of you can ultimately affect you. The power of the world ends at the surface. The power of the self begins at the core. Once a person reaches this realization, they carry themselves differently. There is a calmness in their presence. There is a gravity that cannot be faked. They no longer chase validation, and they no longer fear rejection. They no longer cling desperately to success, and they no longer collapse in the face of failure. They live from a deeper current. And because of this, they often inspire others without even trying. People feel drawn to them because they radiate the strength of someone who is free. This is the fruit of individuation. It is not about becoming untouchable by building walls. It is about becoming untouchable by standing in wholeness. Nothing outside can destroy you because you no longer depend on the outside to know who you are. This is the state Jung described when he said that nobody and nothing can affect you again. To reach the self is not the end of life's journey but the beginning of a new way of living. Jung never promised a world without pain. He knew that sorrow, illness, conflict, and death are woven into the fabric of existence. But he also knew that these forces lose their power to define us once we live from the center of wholeness. Pain remains real, but it no longer feels like destruction. Loss still hurts, but it no longer erases identity. Storms still come, but the tree remains rooted. This is the quiet freedom of individuation. Jung often reminded his students that becoming whole requires patience. The process cannot be rushed. It unfolds across years and through every stage of life. Each crisis, each turning point, each disappointment carries within it the possibility of growth. What seems like an ending may be the beginning of a deeper chapter. What seems like failure may be the call to transformation. When you live with this awareness, nothing is wasted. Even suffering becomes part of the path. And when nothing is wasted, nothing can truly harm you. In this way, the individuated person becomes a witness to life rather than its prisoner. They experience joy fully, yet they are not enslaved by it. They endure sorrow deeply, yet they are not destroyed by it. They stand at the still point between opposites and allow both to move through them. They no longer ask how to escape the world. They learn instead how to stand within it untouched at the core. This does not mean withdrawal from others. On the contrary, individuation makes relationship more authentic. Because the individuated person no longer needs others to complete them, they can meet others as they truly are. Love becomes freer. Friendship becomes deeper. Compassion grows stronger. And even when separation or loss comes, it does not collapse the soul. The self remains whole and alive. In his later years, Jung often spoke of the need for modern humanity to rediscover its soul. He saw a world racing toward machines and numbers and endless distractions. A world that had forgotten the inner life. He warned that without connection to the self, people would remain at the mercy of every external force. They would be swayed by propaganda, shaken by every crisis, and broken by every rejection. But the one who has found their center is no longer so fragile. They stand rooted in something timeless. To live from this place is to know dignity in the face of loss. It is to carry calm in the midst of noise. It is to hold meaning even when life feels chaotic. And most of all, it is to understand that nobody and nothing can truly take away who you are. The opinions of others fade. The rise and fall of fortune comes and goes. The seasons of joy and grief continue to turn. But the self endures. It is the flame at the center that no wind can extinguish. This is Jung's legacy. Not a life without pain, but a life where pain is transformed. Not a world without conflict, but a soul that cannot be broken by conflict. Not a promise of perfection, but a path toward wholeness. And when you walk this path, you discover the truth that lies at the heart of Jung's vision. Nobody and nothing will affect you again. Because the power is no longer outside. It lives within.